Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Live Your Raw Life podcast. Welcome to the platform where the intention is to help you live your rich, authentically aligned, wholesome life. I'm your host, Rachel Ann Watkins. Together, let's raise your vibration and awareness in order for you to live the raw life that was meant for you. Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Live Your Raw Life podcast. Today, I am joined by Thomas Miller. Thanks, Thomas, for being on the show.
Oh, I am thrilled. We're talking van to bigger van here.
Yes.
I feel like David to your Goliath.
Yes. And when we're hooked up and we're traveling down the road, we're as big as a semi. So I actually envy the smaller size because I haven't even driven this yet.
It's all fun. This is so cool connecting, though. We both are doing this remotely from RVs.
Yes. So cool. It just goes to show what's possible.
Thanks, COVID. I mean, if there's anything to say thanks to that nasty thing, this would be it.
Exactly. Yes. I'm so excited to have you on the show. I was introduced to you through the Astrology Hub podcast, and I was just so intrigued. You had some really amazing things to say. You are an astrologer. And if we could get into just right away, because the story of how you landed into astrology was fascinating to me. Would you mind to share that here on the show?
Wow. Well, it goes back most of 62 years because I was born into a fundamental Christian family in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is definitely one of those Bible Belt type communities. Mm-hmm. So you have to get the context of this. Middle-class family, Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the late 50s, early 60s. You get the picture. Okay. We're talking Mayberry RFD here kind of thing. And our faith, our church, our affiliation with the church, everything, the whole package was just our environment growing up. That was it. I have one brother, younger, a couple of years, and neither of us rebelled or questioned what we were taught. That was it. There was no outside the borders. There was nothing, it was like, we didn't even know. And we didn't explore because, of course, that was of the devil. So you didn't go there. And all we were concerned about was that we were, set for heaven. Make sure that's in place, right? And it was like, okay, and then you're all right. Well, then let's study the Bible. And that's kind of what the world was. I went to a Christian junior high, went to a Christian college. I was actually going into the ministry. In the Baptist church, there's one of the things that one of the commitments you can kind of make is to surrender your life to the ministry. And I had done that as a teenager. So I was headed to Baptist seminary. I've always said, thank the stars and God and whoever else was involved that I didn't go down that path. In college, I took a right turn at broadcasting and went into television news and actually was anchoring the news when I was a senior in college, doing the 6 and 10 news on an ABC television station.
When you were in college?
I was a senior in college.
Phenomenal.
So that route never led me back around to seminary. And then life started to unfold. And I went through not one, but 2 divorces by the time I was 50. Wow. So in my world, it was basically shock and awe. I really was so unconscious, I didn't know what had just happened. And a Baptist boy from Tulsa doesn't get divorced, period. And here I am twice. So I finally sat down and didn't look at all of them and, oh, these people are so bad. I looked at me. What is it about me that these people can't be with? And that was my first year in the RV, which actually I have 2 podcasts. So the other one's Subconscious Mind Mastery is where I explored that whole thing. I started with the first episode. It's kind of a sequel, but the first episode was where I explored being told by that pastor who I had committed to go into the ministry in his church, looked at me about 10 years later, sitting in Vail, Colorado, not far from where you are. We were over there by the Golden Bridge, what is now the ski lift. Back then it was tennis courts. And we were sitting in the bleachers of those tennis courts. And he looked at me and he said, you know, in all of my years of ministry, there have been two people that really failed. One guy was in Arkansas. He had run off with somebody in the choir and broke up his family. And then he turns and he points his finger right in my face and he says, and you. He said, you have been the biggest disappointment in my ministry. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And that began, after. So that was one of the things that came out, is that I had created being a disappointment because this guy was so highly influential in my life. So here I am sitting there literally in the ashes after a second divorce, just devastated. So I bought an RV and I kind of did what you're doing. I had a job out on the east side of Dallas, and some friends had an RV park actually, and I parked it there. And back in those days, I drank alcohol quite freely, and it would be a bottle and then some, and then maybe more, and then maybe another one, to sit there at night and try to just get the sheer panic to calm down. But during that time, I started unpacking my life, and just was like pulling the string on a ball of twine. I mean, the whole thing just came apart. And that's when I saw how I was showing up in the world for other people. So I started making changes, and I basically whiteboarded the whole upbringing, all the belief system from the past, gone, like you would literally erase a whiteboard. And I thought, okay, now I get to write what goes on this board. And I started looking for new belief systems. And I found Bob Proctor back in the day. May his soul rest in peace. He was a great mentor for so many of us. And he taught me that I was responsible for my life, and that what I thought turned into reality. I was never taught that. I was taught you pray and maybe you get an answer to prayer. But another thing that came to me during that year in the RV was that I did something that I was told that was totally of Satan. I looked at astrology.
Kiss, kiss.
Ooh. And I'm a Scorpio. I was born on October 30th. And I looked at that and I read it for the very first time. I was 49 years old. And I thought, this reads me like a book. What else does this have to say? And that started the journey right there. That started the inquiry. So the first thing you have to do is you have to learn to speak the language, right? You have to learn what all this symbolism and archetypes and all this stuff that we don't. So I started studying on astro.com, just on their interactive chart. And no other formal training, just started putting pieces together. And I'd make all these notes, and I started to understand myself. And I was like, okay, wait a minute, this connects to that. Oh, I see. Okay. And this influence is over here. And I just spending hours and hours comparing that to me. And it kept reading me like so accurately. And then I started through it to understand, well, wait a minute, I could do this and maybe I'd get a different outcome. Like one of my things is, let's say the South Node. My South Node is in Libra and the North Node is in Aries. I'm sorry, flip that around. South Node is in Aries, North Node is in Libra.
Okay.
All right. South Node Aries is war, fighter, survive. One of us will walk away and it won't be you. North Node in Libra. What does Libra ruled by Venus? Love, peace, balance, harmony, encouragement, things beautiful. So for me, I understood finally, if I just love everybody, if I just be nice, if I just ooze those kinds of qualities, and guess what? Whenever I do anything that comes from the old paradigm, even if I slip into that a little bit on my podcasts, it falls completely flat. And here come the emails. I mean, there is no energy in my life to support that kind of thing. And you know how there are people who have the sarcastic approach, or they have the edgy approach, or this kind of thing, and they, make millions of dollars doing it. If I do that, I mean, it just goes nowhere. But if I send out love, if I send out healing, encouragement, I mean, it's like butter. Mm-hmm. So that's just one example of what I started finding in the chart, of these little nuggets that, like, wow, I could be different. We said in exchanging greetings before this that you're a Taurus, I'm a Scorpio. Well, there's the opposite sides of the chart. See? So the characteristics that you were born with are the ones that I work on. Balance, peace, harmony, connection to the earth, groundedness. See, which are opposite of Scorpio. But all I have to do is just look on the other side of the chart. This is so easy. It really is so easy. So I just kept doing that. It was all just for me. And then in 2018, I was actually up in Aspen. I had spent a couple of years up there skiing. And the last day of the 2017-2018 season, my buddy and I were over on Snowmass, and I told him when we started skiing that I wanted about the last hour of the day to ski down. And so he, totally fine. So I sat up there at the top of the Big Burn chair, which was not running at the end of the year. And the bench was kind of buried in snow, and I dug away a little spot to sit down, and I had my journal there, and I pulled out, and I was all ready for this great connection with my higher self, and was going to get all these messages, and it was so flat. It was like a pancake. I mean, it was just crazy. I was sitting up there, and it was just like, well, this has been an okay year. The snow was terrible that year, but I'm so grateful to be here, and, looking out to the left and the right and the beautiful scenery. And I was like, this is beautiful. I'm so grateful to be in this spot. And it was like, just nothing, right? Nothing. So I started to ski down. I folded the thing up, put it back in my ski jacket, and started heading down. And I mean, halfway down that first run, it started pouring in. And it basically, I stopped real quick, swung over by a tree that's in the run there, and I pulled that journal out, and I just started writing as fast as I can. And it basically was that this was your time to rest and recharge and reload. And now it's your time to take it out to the world. So it's kind of like you're complete here. And within 6 weeks, I was heading back to Texas, leaving Colorado behind, which I never thought I would do. And got back there, and basically, there was a relationship that I was in at the time that we rekindled. And as soon as I got back, she threw her back out. So I was a caregiver for about 6 weeks while she went through surgery and recovery and everything. And what I did was started looking at astrology again very closely. And I started reading some books. And Noel Till's book on careers, with that in one hand and the chart in the other, I kind of figured out that maybe I had the potential to do this even professionally. So I gave it a shot. And that's kind of what launched what I'm doing now. I, first of all, did some courses and some deeper study than I had done, because I had to take it deeper, had to know more. And then I started a podcast, which I'd started one in 2013, started the other one in early 2019. And it was, and kind of like you were talking about with yours, the prompt said, no, not weekly, daily. And so I've figured, well, okay, look, it's recorded. So if I totally mess it up, I can always just scrap it and start over. Right. And that began the Fun Astrology podcast with me kind of fumbling around. And then that, by doing it every single day and coming up with what those aspects are on the daily chart, is basically what we talk about, has led us through COVID and now into the situation that we're in Ukraine. And Lord only knows where we're headed from here. But that's kind of the journey in a very long. Astrology is not from the devil, is the one lesson of all of that.
Yes.
That's the one takeaway. It is not satanic. Oh my.
Oh my is right. What a journey, Thomas. Oh my goodness. If I could just, I want to kind of break this down a little bit, because the one thing that really connected with me, that I really resonated, was you talking about growing up with that religious background. I too went to a private school up until I was a sophomore in high school, and then went back again when I was a freshman in college. And then I realized this is not for me. Doesn't mean I'm not spiritual, but this religion specifically is not for me. But unlike you, I questioned. I was the one in the classroom at a very young age. So when I was in elementary school, I was like, but why? And my teachers hated it, because it was just, you believe. You just
They didn't have an answer.
They didn't have an answer.
On the spot. They're like, whoops.
Yes. And in front of like the whole class, nonetheless, right? So I was definitely an outside of the box thinker at a very young age, and just like really wanting to understand, like, if I can wrap my head around this, then maybe I can get on board. But if you are just saying I have to just believe, I can't get behind that. So that was super interesting. And I really loved how it just, in my opinion, what it does is it shows that, yes, astrology is literally the stars in the sky and the planets and the sun and the moon and all of it. And when we're born, we have this blueprint. And what happens if we just look at that? And then when you start digging into that and you start looking at our ancestors and how they would plant by the moon and the stars and the constellations and just all the other components that are connected, it's fascinating. So I really love that you brought that up. Thank you. The second thing is, I love the first podcast. You did share this before, was that it was how to get rid of the hiccups using cat cow.
Yeah, that was the second.
Oh, it's the second. Okay.
I did this, the first one was, you're my greatest disappointment. The second one was, I didn't know what I was going to do. I just had this intuitive prompt to do a podcast. So I didn't know what to do. I'm like, okay, it's kind of like you. It's a blog. Okay, I'm going to just throw stuff down about my life. I had the hiccups that night.
But I think it's great. I think that's great information, because there are some people, like, I remember growing up, one of my teachers told me to do the duck drink, where you drink from the opposite side of the cup to get rid of the hiccups. But I'm also a yoga teacher. So hearing that cat cow is another way to help, switch the diaphragm. That makes total sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I learned the cup technique when I was in a newsroom and when I was 21, and I've used that all the way through. But like you were talking about, what is the hiccups? It's a diaphragm spasm, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd been doing yoga and I was like, well, let's try this. I'm like, dang, that worked. Podcast.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for sharing.
That one doesn't exist. I took it off.
Oh, okay. Well, now it's, at least that information is out there. So the other thing is, if we could just chat a little bit, because I think this is really important, as well as something that I'm seeing that's coming more to the forefront, as far as in my world anyway, people working with various healers and manifesting and those aspects of life, is tapping into the messaging of the past and rewriting that messaging. Because that's what really I heard you speaking about when you said, I realized I had been telling myself that I'm a disappointment. So your subconscious was telling you I'm a disappointment. So then no matter what you were doing, unknowingly you were disappointing people. And so to be able to witness that is really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It was strong. I mean, I just could see the thread of the pattern of, if I haven't disappointed you yet, stand by. I'll figure it out.
Right. Yeah. So then how did you work your way to changing that message?
I'll tell you, this is another way where astrology is so powerful, because the opposite direction of things. Now, I got to say, I didn't find that early on. Back to that original year in the RV in 2009, I spent the whole calendar year, basically 2009, doing this, like what I was talking about, just unraveling my life and learning all this new stuff. And one of the things I came across just scrolling through the internet was a blog that some precious lady, I wish I had it still. I'd love to just reach out to her and thank her. She put a thing on there that said, do the opposite. And she referenced a video from the Seinfeld episode, George Does the Opposite. And that video is still on YouTube. It's about a 4-minute skit. A lot of people have watched it. It's surprising how many people know of that skit. But it's basically where George is all bemoaning that his life isn't going the way he wants and nothing ever works out and all of this. And he's just ready to quit. And Jerry says some of the best psychological advice you could ever imagine. He says, well, George, if you're doing this and things don't work out for you going that way, why don't you do the opposite of what you would naturally do, and maybe it'll work out? And they play it out with a little skit where this pretty lady comes in and sits down at the counter of the restaurant, where the little cafe where they are. And she looks over at George, over her shoulder, and George orders the same sandwich that he always orders. And he looks over at the lady, and then he looks down and avoids eye contact. And Jerry says, George, do the opposite. So he calls the waitress back. No, I'll have and orders a different sandwich. And then he goes, yeah, I'm going to do this. So he walks over to the lady and he says, hi, my name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents. And she goes, oh, hi, my name is Aline. I'd like to meet, And it's just a great little skit. But what wonderful advice is, like, if things aren't working out for you the way you're going, try the opposite. And then, we study aspects in astrology. Look at it halfway in between, or 45 degrees. I mean, the truth is probably not on the extremes. It's probably somewhere in the middle. And astrology shows us that so beautifully. So it's really a cool metaphor.
I love that. Thank you.
So I started, first of all, I unwound, to answer your question, I unwound the disappointment part. And it really wasn't complete for me until 3 years later, when I went back to Vail. And I stayed at the Manor Vale, where we used to stay growing up. That was our little place. And I went back to that spot. And like I said, those tennis courts are gone now, but there is one that's part of a condo. They had the Texas townhouses down there next to the Manor Vale. Those were the properties of the original people who developed Vail. That was like the first one. And they had a private tennis court. And they didn't have any bleachers by it, but they had some trees planted over there to the side. And I went back and sat down under those trees for about 2 hours and just bawled. And I didn't care who walked by and saw me. And I let it all out. And just like you talked about the waves of snow that you've had this ski season, that's kind of the waves of the emotion. I just let it come. And then, get it back together for a few minutes, and then it would hit again. And I just let it all out right there at that spot. I'm a water sign.
Yes.
That's what we do.
Exactly. Yes. Very true. Oh, that's beautiful. Talk about.
So that began the healing. You got to let it out. You got to get it. And so that was the completion. And when I got up and walked away from there, I walked away. I am not a disappointment. And that was a mirage. And then just started trying to do the opposite intentionally.
That's
So,
great advice. Intentionally do the opposite.
mhm,
Cool.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Thomas. That's huge. And it's hard when we have to look inside at that shadow and we have to face it head on. That's usually what scares everybody. So they keep going in the normal direction. They keep doing the things that aren't working because it's the fear that pushes us away from the shadow. But when you lean in, this is what one of my intuitives in Boulder always says, lean into what scares you.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Carl, something popped up on, I don't do a lot of social media, but sometimes I'll get on there just for those little mental breaks, for a minute. And there was a quote from Carl Jung, and it basically said that we humans will go to all extent to not pull that curtain back. We don't really want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
We want to cover it up.
Yeah.
We mask it. We deny it. We avoid it. We numb it up with drugs and alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do anything.
Totally.
Because it hurts too much to pull the curtain back. There were a lot of tears that year in the RV. A lot of tears.
I bet. But now here you are.
It changed. It changed everything.
Amazing.
The other thing that was so amazing is just the timing of it all.
Oh, right.
Because that was like 2009 was a full year after my second divorce. I spent that first year doing everything just mentioned, shaking my fist at God. I was like, if you can't answer a simple prayer like heal my marriage, then I don't want to hear about arcs and walking on water and all this other baloney. I was done. I was done. Now I'm bringing it back in, but bringing it back in a different way.
Cool. Sounds super healthy.
Yeah.
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 Good.
Source, not rules, not dogma.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom. We are co-creators.
Mm-hmm.
This is the thing where the church gets so off. First of all, if you want, for those of you who have people, if you're interested in astrology and either have that little bit of stigma or you have somebody that, oh, don't look at that. That's Satan. Just point to Psalm 19:1. It says the heavens declare the glories of God. And then you can remind them about the nativity scene. How did those three magi, i.e. Persian astrologers, get there? They saw the star and they followed it. Well, what do we do every day on our podcast? We look at the stars and we try to align with the energy. And the Bible is chock full of astrological references. It's just amazing that Source put all of that symmetry. Oh, by the way, how did all of our planets in our solar system fall along the same line? Was that random? I don't think so. That was one of the things that Bob Proctor taught that really made sense to me. He had a quote from a guy that was in the space program, the Apollo space program. He was basically constructed the technology that took us to the moon. And his quote was that because of the physics, because of mathematics, but specifically physics, they could build the precision that they needed to launch a rocket at a certain time, fire an orbital firing and send it into trajectory. All that is physics. Land it. Back then, they used to land them in the ocean. Next to us, they could park the boat where the thing was going to come down because of physics. And I thought, what he's talking about is God's creation here that is precise. But what I was taught from the spiritual side, which I would think to God would be more important, is random. Just lob your prayers up into space and maybe yours will get answered, right? Dear Lord, I need ... Well, good luck. You got a 50-50 chance. And that's how basically it's taught.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we learn is that if we co-create, our thoughts guide that creation, number one. Astrology shows us the energy And what is astrology built on? Angles. What is that? Geometry. So you got physics on the physical side, geometry on the spiritual side, and it is just as precise, right down to the minute. You want to know how precise it is?
Let's hear it.
This was amazing. I do a little, sometimes do a little day trading. And a guy who used to trade on the floor in Chicago, the futures pits in Chicago, they don't have them anymore. It's all computerized now. But back in the day, they were all together on the floor. And he came up with this technique, and he was doing astrology. And he would have the times of the various aspects that will happen today. So, for example, if the moon aligns with Mars and Venus, which are conjunct right now as we're recording this, or for instance, coming up, Mars and Saturn are going to conjoin in April. Whatever's going on up there today. And then he would also get the aspects of the times for Chicago, which is where the futures are traded. They're not traded in New York, they're traded in Chicago. So he'd have the list of today's times when all of these would happen. And he has a little trading system that he taught me that basically, if you see enough of a trend where, let's say that the futures price of the S&P 500 is going up and up and up, and it's been going up for more than his number was 6 minutes, then you take the opposite trade at the time of that aspect and let it go. And you're looking for basically just 1 point. You're looking for a real quick little scalp on the change of direction. You know that technique works about 70% of the time.
Wow. Fascinating.
Fascinating. 70% chance of success if you just know where the times are that those aspects are going to happen, and you look at a trend to see if it's been moving in a certain direction, and you go, okay, it's been going up, so you short it. It goes, and if you get your point or so of it going down the other way, you just close the trade out. It's day traders do this all the time. But serious to goodness, I've got I use Janus 5 as the software that I print the list out. It's got the best calendar program for this by far. And you can print the list out of the calendar of the exact times. And you've got to, I mean, there's more to it than this, but I'm just giving you the skeleton only to tell you that when you look at something that's supposed to happen at, right now I'm looking, it's 11:13 where I am. Let's say that one of those aspects is 11:13. You look at the chart, the price has been moving up. You take the opposite trade, 7 out of 10 times, it's going to change directions right there within 3 minutes.
I would suspect then that this could be applicable to crypto.
I would imagine. Now, remember, everything has a birth time. So you'd have to, if you were doing crypto, you'd have to get something dialed in that you're going to use as the crypto chart.
Sure.
But you can also just do it. I mean, you could say, well, let me think about that. No, actually, the location is the market.
Got it. Okay.
So you would have to have, and what I do on that is I set the date, like set today. So mine would be for today would be set to Chicago, and I put it at midnight. So I'm getting the sweep of the whole day because, you know, futures are traded basically all week except for 1 hour a day. They take a break. So you get the full spectrum. But yeah, you would have to have a birth time, a birth location. And I don't know what that is like for Bitcoin. I don't know.
I don't either.
Boy, but it's wild. I mean, that would be something worth looking at.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing. That is so fascinating. Oh my gosh.
There's a financial tip, but be careful because you were talking about some really dicey trading. This is not trading advice. I am not a financial advisor and all the other disclaimers. I'm talking about astrology being precise. That was the purpose of it. But it is that precise.
70%, that's huge.
Within the day.
Right.
To move the computerized markets.
Crazy.
Think about that. The financial markets are all controlled by the fastest, biggest, smartest computers on the planet. This isn't the Defense Department stuff. We're talking about them taking your money. That's how big and smart these computers are. And yet through astrology. You can go wiggle around in there and go, oh, I'll just take that little bit right there. Thank you very much.
And walk away with a smile on your face.
And just go, nobody saw that. There's nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here. Right. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'm curious if we could just chat a little bit about, there's different types of astrology. So what kind of astrology do you focus on?
Well, I learned and have stayed so far with just the typical Western tropical zodiac. I do mix up the house systems. So I was looking at Placidus originally, and Placidus reads me like a book. Then I did the Hellenistic course with Chris Brennan, and he got me interested in whole sign houses. And then I'm doing some studying with Robert Glasscock, and he uses equal signs, and come to find out that Linda Goodman also taught him equal signs. And there's some precision on equal signs that does not show up on the other two that has me really kind of become a fan of equal. For example, Robert talks about when he first got into astrology, which was, he was 20, and that was 57 years ago. So he's 77 now. This guy's been at it for a long, long time, done thousands and thousands of readings. And for example, and I get the sides confused, but he has an aspect. He has a planet. He has a natal position with Mars, I believe, and I forget the details on this. But the interpretation, he has a little scar that he got in his teenage years, and it's hidden under his hairline. So it's not something that you would see if you met him, but it's there. And in astrology, it shows up exactly in the house and the alignment with Mars that it should, for him to have that on the side that he has it on.
Wow.
And that only shows up in equal houses. If you put it in Placidus, it changes the house. If you put it in whole sign, it changes the house. So he just, there's one thing about when you have not practiced astrology as long as some of these other people, like Steve Forrest, same thing, 50 years. You can lean on their experience. And when somebody says, look, if you're wanting to go that precise, and he teaches rectification techniques where you can dial in your birth time based on midheaven and solar arc type, one moving planets 1 degree, or moving the midheaven 1 degree per year, 1 degree per, to find events basically that happen in your life. I'm doing a really bad job of explaining that. It's a technical technique, so I don't want to get in the woods, too far on that. But it all is based on equal house system.
Okay.
And it seems to be more accurate. And that's what Linda Goodman taught him. So I don't know. So 3 charts come up. If I'm ever studying something, I will look at all 3. I'll look at Placidus, equal, which are often very close. They're very close. And then I'll look at whole sign as well.
Got it. Okay.
And they all work. They all work in their own way.
In their own way, right? Depending on the information maybe that you want to discover.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or like you, for example, if you're doing a reading and you're talking and the client wants to look at Placidus, and typically they will, because that's what they're familiar with. So you start looking at the structure of the arrangement of everything in Placidus, and then you say, let's just throw this up on whole sign. And all of a sudden everything shifts into their 7th house, and you ask them about their relationships and they start to cry. And you go, See, I think my thought on that, just for what it's worth, is we're talking about infinity here. We're talking about an infinite universe. Let that word soak in. We're the ones who put the chart together. We're the ones who put those lines on there. Not God, not source. So why put it in a box?
Great perspective. Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, if we look at sidereal Vedic astrology, I'm a Libra. I'm like, I'm sorry, but this incarnation right here is not a Libra, but maybe I am. And maybe I'm starting to look at Vedic more, especially now that we're kind of having this wave 2 of world events. And as we're talking and recording this, Vladimir Putin is in Ukraine, and it's just created this incredible tragedy. And I know we all want answers around it. And I know that Vedic has nuances that Tropical Western does not. So I'm starting to kind of think about learning some of that too, because I just want the biggest perspective I can. There's nothing wrong with any of this. And I'll tell you, for those who do kind of get locked into their way of doing it, I would highly encourage to just loosen the grip and look at it all. It's all one big, beautiful tapestry, and you're just looking at one little piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the astrology reading that I've had back in 2020, because it was like, I mean, I was the little girl that read the horoscopes in the newspaper before I read the comics.
Great. That's awesome.
Yes. But not necessarily, I didn't study it. I've just always been intrigued by it. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly. Or then I start reading about Taurus and I'm like, yep, this is me. And then I had my first reading actually in 2020. So it really wasn't that long ago. And he was a Vedic astrologer. And, you know, Vedic, they take into consideration the wobble of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
I'm still a Taurus. And I'm like, yep,
are you?
I am still a Taurus. And there were a lot of things that he said that I was like, wow, okay, you know, that made sense. And then I listened to it again about 6 months ago. And I was like, holy, are you kidding? Like the things that I'm doing now, he was talking about, and I had no idea it was coming. It was mind blowing. So it's really fun to record a reading so that you can go back, and then it's a lot of information. Mm-hmm. When you get an astrology reading, you're full at the end of information. So to digest and process that, it really takes some time. And I had to sit with it for a while. And then, like I said, when I listened to it again, I'm like, this is fascinating. So I am so curious, just the equal signs. I've never heard of that before.
Equal was the second house system. Okay, so whole sign came about originally because they didn't have time back then. Think about it. Right. So how do you create a precise birth time when you didn't have time? So it was based on the ascendant sunrise. And basically what they did is if the sun came up in Pisces, then Pisces became the first house, all 30 degrees. And then it would go in zodiacal order around following that. Well, what that does, there are several constructs, and one of the things that people don't like is that ascendant just sits in the first house, and then the midheaven floats as well. So sometimes it's in the 9th or the 11th house, and people don't like that. So what they did then is, let's say you had just for round numbers, a 15-degree Piscean ascendant. So the sun was at 15 degrees in Pisces when it rose on the day of this chart's birth, right? This birth chart. Well, what the equal system did is it just made 15 degrees the cusp of every house, but still gave each one 30 degrees. So now the second house begins at 15 degrees Aries and goes on around in zodiacal order.
Okay.
But 30 degrees per sign, right, per house. So then, but you can then have two signs in a house, but you won't have an intercepted sign like you would in Placidus.
Okay.
Steve Forrest, for example, who I've narrated audiobooks for. I've done 5 audiobooks for Steve.
That was another incredible story, by the way.
Yeah. You know, but see, the thing about seeing that maybe I could do this professionally. So I've done the Elements series, and then we just completed one called The Endless Sky, which is a collection of articles. So that's 5 audiobooks for Steve. I've got another author that I've narrated a lot of audiobooks for as well, Fred Dodson. And so this whole collection of audiobooks becomes a revenue source for me.
Mm-hmm.
So Steve only uses Placidus.
Mm.
And the reason is because he says that that it's the one that reads him the best from his perspective, which his style is called evolutionary astrology. So he looks at the chart to answer the age-old question, why the heck am I here? What is this all about? The
Mm-hmm.
soul's purpose, the soul's journey, not only this incarnation, but through the whole thing. So he looks at it from that perspective. And he just says, and here again, here's a guy who is at the top of his field who says that this house system works the best year in and year out. He's done so many readings that he's booked for the next 10 years to do readings. And he just turned 72.
Oh my God. That's incredible.
So if this guy says Placidus is the best, you kind of have to look at that with honor, respect, and copy it. Right?
Right.
Don't, okay, look, use that as your base and play with it from there is kind of what I think,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like let his 50 years of experience teach you something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so whenever I look at that and I'm looking at that way from looking at that perspective of the chart, I always start with Placidus. But there's a problem. So I started offering these reports on my website. And somebody writes in to get a report, and you have to have the birth time, and they are above the 66th latitude. So they're born basically up at the way top of the North Pole. They were, I forget what country they were from, but they were way up, way up high. And the Placidus system breaks above 66 north and 66 south. So my software, one program I had kicked out a chart and it was wrong. And she came back and she said, these are not my planets. And well, no, I'm sorry. Actually, the software kicked out the report and it was correct. I forget. It was Janus. I'd mentioned Janus before. Janus is constructed by an amazing group of, it's a team of astrologers from New Zealand. Whoa. And they actually put the report out in the equal house system. And I sent it to the client and she said, no, this isn't my chart. And somehow she had gotten a chart from that she thought at least was Placidus. But Placidus puts the planets in all kinds of wonky, wrong positions above 66 and below 66. So it breaks.
Okay.
So it's almost like, if you have to go back to equal anyway. But seriously, what I do when I'm doing a reading is typically, like you said, that your Taurus stayed Taurus. So that I'm guessing that you have a late degree ascendant in Taurus. Do you know what your degree is?
I don't know the degree off the top of my head.
See, I'll bet it's later in Taurus. So there's 30 degrees per sign. So I'm guessing that it's probably in that third, what they call decan. So between 20 and 30. And that would allow that precession of the equinoxes to not kick you out and back into Aries. Mm-hmm. So you've got a lot of pad there, in other words. See, I'm a 6-degree Scorpio. So boom, back to Libra, because we are about a sign. So it's probably, you're right there you're probably toward the end and it just kept you in by a little bit. What I do, so we're talking about cusps there. So let's say that your ascendant is really close and maybe a house system would change a particular alignment in your chart and put a planet in one house in one system and another house in another. I just look at both and then consider both as possible and then talk it through with you about which one of those has shown up more prominently in your life.
Makes sense.
That's all. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what I'm hearing you say is you take a look at the chart from a couple different angles, and then that's how you offer your readings.
Yes.
Perfect. Oh, how beautiful is that? Because then you get such a different, a wider lens perspective. I see bigger picture. Yeah.
So you're looking at it and saying, this Jupiter could be in the 6th house, career, job, health, or it could be in the 7th house, relationship. So how are your relationship? How's your relationship? And you say, which one? I've been divorced 3 times. Let's look at this Jupiter in the 6th. How's your job? Well, I'm vice president of the company. I was on the fast track. See, that's where you see how it's going to show up in their life one way or the other.
Sure. And then you can really dive deeper once you discover what's been aligning and what hasn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Very cool.
And also maybe more tilt toward that house system. So the house, let's say that Placidus had it in 6, then you go, okay, you know what? Let's just stay with Placidus here. Looks like we might do better here.
Right. Makes total sense. I love that. Okay. So it sounds to me like you offer astrology readings and you offer it wide lens to start and then really dive in, which is really cool. And then you also have 2 podcasts. Still 2 podcasts.
Still.
Are they both daily?
No, subconscious is, I've always done it literally only when there was something there.
Okay.
So I don't do it on a fixed schedule.
Okay. So it's something comes up. You're like, ooh, subconscious. This is where that needs to go. Let's put that in there. Got it.
Yeah. It's always just been from the heart.
Oh, beautiful. That's great. But the Astrology Fun podcast is daily.
That's daily.
And those are just fairly short. As
I try to keep them under about 8 minutes.
Okay.
Originally it was 5, then it got to be 6. Now I'm really trying, if I can get them in and done around 6 or less, that's my goal.
Cool. And does that just
too much of your time?
Right. So it's just like a little nugget for the day of as far as what's happening astrologically.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
And exploring the energies around that. So it's not just the alignments. I mean, there's lots of apps and everything you can do to get that information. It's what do you do with it today?
That's the key. Yeah. And then you also have some courses that you offer.
Now, yes, and I'm not offering readings as we're recording this. I might start again, but my schedule right now is about 17 or 18 hours a day.
Oh, geez.
But I do have on the Fun Astrology website, I have 3 amazing astrologers.
Okay.
And it's so cool how the universe just sent these people to me, and I just have links to them. So I'm just referring passing it on. You can listen to each of them. I did a little podcast with them, and you can pick the one that you like, but one trained under Jeffrey Wolf Green. So she is very much into evolutionary astrology from a Pluto perspective. Another trained under Steve Forrest, and she's doing classes with Kepler now. So she does evolutionary as well, but from Steve's perspective. And then the other one I found in Robert Glasscock's course, and she does like everything. And just, I listen to her every week in these classes I'm doing with Robert, and she just always, whenever Delia starts to speak, everybody just quiets down. It's like, she is amazing. So I've got 3 people that are just so cool that I've said, if you want a really good astrological consultation about something in your life, these 3, I would pick any one of the 3.
Ooh, nice. Okay. So I'm looking on the website. It looks like Marilyn Michelle, Laura Taft, and then Delia Golden.
Delia Golden. Right.
Okay. Cool.
Right.
And they're right here. That's awesome. Ooh, and then Akashic Readings with Caroline.
Yeah. Caroline Horn does these Akashic Records readings that are amazing. And I've done a couple of podcasts with her, and I think I need to put the links there to those, but I just had one. We did another one and did the podcast as the interview, was the reading. And
cool.
Then, I haven't launched that one yet. No, I've got to get that one edited. That's right. That's
Ooh,
right.
So you got a preview.
That one's coming. Yes, that one's coming. So it's a good package. It really is a good package.
Yeah, that is so wonderful. I love, and that's really what has been hitting home for me right as of late was collaboration and like promoting other people and building a tribe around whatever it is that you're working on and who you work with instead of competition. Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's talk about solar arc astrology for a second,
Okay.
because this is where you bring the chart forward from the time of your birth. You bring it up to today, because obviously the sky keeps moving, right?
Uh-huh.
From the very second you're born, that moon is making tracks away from that place where it was. So solar arc is a what they call a progressed technique. It's basically progression in astrology is moving it forward to today. So solar arc is one of the ways you do it. And basically what you do is you move every planet on the chart forward 1 degree every year. That's it. Just think of it. Click, click, click. This very slow, that faucet that's dripping that just drives you crazy, and you drip, drip. It's 1 degree per year, just really slow movement forward. So what it does is it tells you where your interests are now. It doesn't replace your birth chart. Nothing does ever. Think of it like Photoshop. If you took a beautiful picture of the snow that's fresh in the mountains today, and that was your Photoshop picture, but you want to play with it, what do? You add a layer, right? And you might, like, you could make the sky deeper blue with that layer. Or you could paint out a tree that your power line, let's say a power line you wanted to paint out of this great picture, but there's a power line going right through it. Mm-hmm. You can paint that out. That's another layer. Well, that's what you're doing with these other embellishments in the chart. When you put the transiting planets over your natal chart, that's one layer. Solar arc is another layer. And what solar arc does is kind of tells you where your programming is right now, because obviously we move forward, we progress. So in that system, my sun has moved from Scorpio all the way over to Capricorn. 1 degree per year. This is slow. And just now, my rising sign has moved from Leo to Virgo. So you see, the Capricorn moved from Sagittarius into Capricorn right at the time I was in Colorado. So already there, I was ready to stop playing and start getting serious. And then the Virgo is all about mentoring and helping others. So I've got this thing going on in my head right now of really putting structures together to help advance other people and groom them up. And that's just following my chart.
Beautiful.
So you see why I haven't come back to Colorado. We were talking before about if I came back to Colorado, it would be like somebody who had been on AA for 12 years going back into a pool hall.
Yes.
Bad deal, right? Don't go near there, because I would ski every day and nothing would get done for 5 months.
Oh, I get it. Oh my gosh, that is a great way of looking at it. The solar arc. Okay, I like that.
But that's just following your chart. That's following the energy of the chart. So again, Leo, I mentioned I was anchoring the news when I was 21 years old, 21 years old. And if you back up, so the Leo would have been the out there, the projecting out, the roar, go out in the line. It's, a lot of actors and actresses, politicians, preachers, people that do things in public. And I'm realizing that while I'll still keep my podcasts going and all of that's still there, because that's also represented in my natal chart, that there is this shift of energy to Virgo. So I'm going to want order. What did I do? I bought a van. Well, Steve Forrest has a great line for Virgos, and everybody gets mad at me. They go, hey, Virgos are so much more than this. Yes, I know they are. But his line is intended to be funny. It's intended to be light. He said, you can always tell a Virgo. They've organized their sock drawers. It's like Virgos want structure. Yes. It's important to them.
Yes.
And I realize that's coming, and I'll be watching for how that shows up. But another metaphor, and I learned this from Steve, from his books, was Virgo is because it rules the sixth house. And he actually attributes the sixth house to mentorship as much as we also call it health. Everybody says sixth house, health, sixth house, your job. Those are all true, but add mentorship in there. And he even takes it a level deeper, aunts and uncles.
Oh.
So parents show up or siblings show up in the third house. Parents show up in the fourth house. Aunts and uncles show up, children in the fifth, and aunts and uncles in the sixth.
Interesting.
So when you think about what is a healthy aunt-uncle relationship, is one of trust and even mentorship away from the parenting relationship. And that's a really cool way to think about, okay, so I'm looking right now because this one movement per year has just moved in, that there's going to be a morph. I think that when the solar arc changes, when something hits a cusp of solar arc, so it's getting ready to move from one sign to the next, it's about a 3 to 5 year morph. When I was doing television and doing production, that's what you call a slow dissolve. It's like, it's not a hard cut.
Right.
One day you wake up and you go, oh, my sock drawer. No, it's like when I was in Colorado, I played for 3 years and that Capricorn had already taken effect. So Sagittarius was slow to let go. But all of a sudden, the Sagittarius play and travel and ski and all that was changing. And then the energy of that showed up one day on the last day of ski season when I was skiing down, and it was like, you're supposed to go do structured work. Your time here is done. And I actually won't go into the details of it, but I got kicked out, basically. I mean, I think the universe knew that I wouldn't leave I would be slow.
We're going to leave willingly.
We'll help you.
Yep.
And now you just look at those and, you wink up at the sky.
That's interesting. That 3 to 5 years. So what I hear you say through that is that's when moving through the different signs, that's typically how long then it takes.
It's my experience. I think so.
Okay.
Steve, do you have time for a quick little story that Steve told in one of his books?
Yeah, I do. And then
on solar arc.
Yep. And then let's talk about where everybody can reach you and find your podcast and all that. So yeah.
This is so poignant to this. This is why I teach solar. Any reading I was doing when I was doing them, I always mention the solar arc chart. So it was in the Book of Earth. Steve told this story about, Book of Fire, because he was talking about Sagittarius. This was in the Book of Fire of the Elements series. And he says this young guy in his early 20s takes off for the Caribbean islands. And he ends up on this island, and the chapter was called Living in Margaritaville. And he did. I mean, he partied. He learned, he got with a boat repair shop, and he learned to do the wood boats and all the intricacies and fix them and all this stuff. And he partied and he lived the Margaritaville lifestyle. He sailed around the islands till they became very familiar. He loved and lost a dozen or more women, the whole thing of being in that space. Very carefree, grew his hair out, probably didn't bathe. I don't know, all of the things that go with it, right?
Yes.
Well, fast forward 30 years. And all of a sudden he's starting to think about, I could take these skills that I've learned about repairing boats and I could start a business. And then he thinks, mom and dad are getting older. They're back up in North Carolina. Maybe I should even think about going back home. They're going to need some help. Ooh, maybe I could combine the two. Maybe I could go back and I a lot of lakes around North Carolina. Maybe I could start a boat repair business. He's starting to think structurally. When Steve revealed his little story as being that this guy was born an early degree Scorpio, and what had happened is because he's early degree Scorpio, when he hit his 20s, that sun moved from Scorpio into Sagittarius, and it was party time. I had to leave the audio booth because I had to have another Scorpio cry. Because he was talking about me. And all of those years in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and into my 50s, I wanted to play. My heart was screaming play. I wanted to be in Colorado. But I did all the stuff I was supposed to do because I got married early. And then we were supposed to have kids, and we were supposed to have a house that I absolutely hated the whole thing because I was living against my chart. And then right on time, just like he talked about, here comes Capricorn. And just like our guy on the islands starts to think about, this has been fun, but mom and dad are getting older. His energy is changing, and it's time to change with it. But that doesn't happen overnight. He didn't throw himself up out of bed one morning and go, oh my God, I got to get out of here. It's a morph. It's a 30-year transit through those signs. So when you're talking about 30 years, what is 3 to 5 years to figure it out? To let that new energy come in and let that old energy that's been with you for 3 decades needs to fade out. But there's a morph. So you need to know where your solar arc sun is and where your solar arc ascendant is. Very important.
I'm going to have to look into that because I think that, it feels very much like you're speaking to me, especially as I shared with you, I moved out of public school teaching in that profession, and the world, society, whatever, teaches us like, this is how it's supposed, you have to do this and you have to have that. And I'm going against so many norms here. I left my career that I went to college for. We live in a camper, like societal norms have gone out the window for us over the last 2 years. So I'm curious to see where I'm starting to see the path, but because as I hear you say, it's like allowing that, just allow it to flow and see where the energy is taking you.
Well, we can presume with you that you're a late Taurus. So I'm guessing that you moved on through. So Taurus, basically, you changed probably pretty fast into Gemini. And then you spent probably your first years in Gemini. And then you are probably in Cancer.
Right now.
Yeah, because it's only 1 degree per year. Like you could experience 4 signs. I'm on the other side of the spectrum. I probably will only have 3 because I'm just moving into Capricorn and I'm 62. So, even if I made it into Pisces, I wouldn't be aware of it. It's like, okay, you tell me that. Yeah. Okay. Got it. But like, you would not be yet 30, 60. Yeah. You're not all the way to Leo yet. So you would probably be in Cancer.
And Leo is my north node.
Ah, okay. All right. So there's the stepping out too. Little uncomfortable?
Yep. Oh, for sure. Hello, podcast.
Yeah.
Hello, get used to your voice.
Exactly. Yeah. Moving into your north node. Oh, that we should all live our north nodes.
Oh, man. Scary AF.
That's where the old hold your nose and dive in scenario.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Embrace it.
Yeah.
Okay. So where can our listeners find you, Thomas?
Oh, thank you for that. So 2 podcasts on all the podcast players. Fun Astrology is the daily one we've been talking about. And then Subconscious Mind Mastery. And that one probably best if you go back and start at the beginning.
Okay. And I will add links to both of those podcasts in the show notes and your website.
Everything now, the action is over on funastrology.com.
Okay, cool. And I will add that link as well. This has been so eye-opening and enlightening and so fun. I thank you so much for being on. I do have one final question I love to ask all my guests. So this is the Live Your Raw Life podcast, which represents and stands for living your rich, authentically aligned, wholesome life. Do you feel you're living that?
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about, oh gosh, we could go on. That could be a 20-minute question. The thing is when you get to the point where you are, then the energy just keeps compounding and it just keeps getting better. It really does. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I realize I'm a late bloomer and now's the time.
Now's the time. There's is there really such a thing as late though? Or is it just right on time?
It's right on time.
Right on time. I love it. Beautiful.
When I look over at human design for me was midlife pause. You're not on the stage. You come back at 50 and that's exactly what happened.
So cool. Awesome. Yay. Well, I loved this conversation. It was so great getting to know you. Thank you so much for coming on. And we'll be in touch for sure.
All right. New friends, new van friends.
Absolutely. And if we make our way down to Florida, we'll definitely try and connect.
Well, you better find out where I am because, I'm like zip zap, right?
Yes.
The greater chance is that if we meet face to face, it will be in your neck of the woods.
Sounds beautiful. Perfect.
Thank you so much. This has been special. I really appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Sending love.
Same.
Heal yourself, heal the world. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you are listening on YouTube or any other podcast platform, I greatly appreciate your support. If something in this episode resonated with you, please like and subscribe to the Live Your Raw Life channel or podcast and leave a review while you're there. Your time, energy, and support is greatly appreciated. Sending light, love, and positive energy your way. We'll see you next week.